the granddaughter of a slave and great-granddaughter of a slave owner. An orphan, she was raised by an aunt in North Carolina. She graduated from Hunter College in New York. After being rejected from graduate work at the University of North Carolina because of her race, she became a labor organizer. She was arrested for sitting in the whites-only section of the bus in Virginia in 1940. 1940. After being rejected for graduate work, she became that organizer, and the litigation that followed her arrest led her to law school at Howard University. She later attempted to pursue further study at Harvard Law. She was rejected because of her gender. She went on to be a legal scholar whose legal reasoning helped Thurgood Marshall's challenge to segregation in Brown versus Board of Education. Her work with Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the 1970s helped to establish the concept of equal protection under the law included gender. In 1965, she became the first African American to receive a doctorate of law from Yale. In 76, she became the first woman to be ordained as an Episcopal priest. And she was a powerful poet. Polly Murray achieved all this while struggling with chronic fatigue, depression, and what she described as sexual in-betweenness. What many have suggested would be described in these times as being non-binary. The words of Polly Murray.
This is titled The Wanderer. I came with the young sun, strong in my limbs, and fresh wind in my hair. Spring follows my footsteps. Joy spills from my eyes. Peace lies in my breast. 1,000 songs tremble in my brain. My heart is merry with song. Will none heed young love from the hills? No one in the loud city reveal themselves? No friends along these many streets? Will none walk with me in twilight? Must love be desolate this long night? A very short poem called Tears. 3 times have I known tears. When I loved you, when I lost you, and when you lost yourself. Blessed be. It is my privilege always to, now reintroduce Reverend Dennis Reynolds from the Eugene area as he talks with us about seasons of love.
Thank you. Love is, as many a country song tells us, sometimes a hurtin' thing. And yet it can be the most glorious of things. The sweetness of love can bring tears to our eyes. Tears come too when love is lost. I also weep when I hear stories about those whose love is questioned, challenged, and sometimes demonized. My heart aches when I hear stories of sex and gender-based oppression, discrimination, and violence for all who, in the face of all of that, might, as the poet describes it, lose themselves. Today, in addition to Brandon's story and Polly Murray's story, I want to share some more stories. For stories, sad stories, bold stories, heartbreaking stories, stories about the good old days, happy stories and sad stories, and love stories are important teaching tools, especially when the stories like Brandon's and Polly Murray's are true. Fictional stories, though, can offer important lessons. Our own experiences and our stories are the most important teaching tools. Because life gives us an infinite number of friggin' growth opportunities. Doesn't it always, right? So today I want to share some of my stories about my own learning about love and about inclusion. Now, I noticed this last week in Weimar that there was a bin full of deeply discounted Valentines cards and candy and decorations. I mean, what a deal, 50% off for those chocolates, right? They wouldn't be good if we hang on to them for a year, but they're still sweet. And you know, all the hype about Valentines can be difficult for many, especially those not in or on the cusp of significant relationships, and it can be a bit challenging sometimes for all of us. You know, it was actually never a very significant holiday. There's nothing particularly important happened on that date. And even Saint Valentine, for whom it's named, was always a minor Catholic saint. We make a big deal of Valentine's Day because we make a big deal of Valentine's Day. That and the fact that Hallmark and the restaurants, etc., have found it beneficial. Buying and giving cards was something, though, I have to admit I was indoctrinated into early. As many of you too probably remembered, on the week before Valentine's Day, we would go to the store and buy a whole packet of those sort of funny, really goofy kids' cards. And we'd take them home and we'd decide, which card am I going to give to whom? Because you had to give a card to everybody, even people you didn't like. And you didn't want the card to be too sweet or too kind, unless it was somebody you really wanted to receive that kind of card. It was, for better or worse, inclusive. By middle school, we left this Valentine cards for everybody behind. And it became something special you did for someone special in your life. And that resulted for lots of kids in no Valentine's cards and no recognition. And that kind of shadow still haunts that holiday in many ways. In middle school, that my indoctrination into America's culture of homophobia moved into an advanced study. I'd begun to study in the church of my childhood. I was raised in the Nazarene Church, which is the right wing of the Methodist movement, where judgment was the message of Sunday mornings, not inclusion. The situation that expanded my learning in middle school happened the week after I, for the first time, did my own laundry. It seems my mother, for some reason, had grown tired of washing stinky adolescent gym clothes. So she said I had to do it myself. So I did. The problem was that my gym clothes included a red sweatshirt. Yes, you have some idea what happened. Unfortunately, all of my clothes were tinted. Now, the gray sweatshirt and the gray gym trunks, that wasn't too bad. They didn't pick up too much dye. But my athletic supporter, also known as Chucks, was a vivid, embarrassingly bright pink. I insisted to my mother, we got to go to the store right now and buy me a new one because I'm not taking this to school. My mother said, don't worry, dear, it will be fine. Well, obviously, my mother had never been in a middle school boys' locker room. It was not fine. That week, I was subjected to merciless harassment and abuse. Some of the boys had perfected the art of the towel snap, where you could wind them up, especially with wet, and snap them, which would result in a very painful welt on the thighs or backside. Those wilts, though, were not as painful as the incredibly cruel homophobic taunts that I was subjected to. I was mortified. In time, though, the welt healed and the tint faded from my clothes. And yet the lessons of what was acceptable and was not acceptable behaviors were embedded deeply within. It was only later that I began to realize that for anyone who in any way did not fit narrow binary gender norms of mid-20th century American culture prescribed, the abuse, the humiliation, and the acts of violence would continue, and it would often be much more dangerous than the welts from a towel snap. I had been carefully taught a gender binary, heteronormative way of viewing the world, and that deviating from that norm could be dangerous. In my freshman year in college, I began a lifetime of work of deconstructing some of those notions. I changed my major that year from speech and rhetoric to theater. And what came along with that was theater friends. And many in the theater crowd were out lesbian and out gay men. One friend, Richard, with whom I had been cast in a couple of plays, invited us after rehearsal one night to all go with him to the local gay bar. Before long, it became something many of us, both gay and straight, would do regularly, because at the Riviera room in Eugene, they didn't check for ID. So one did not need to be 21. Who knew we could get in? And we would go there periodically together. And my then young girlfriend, who was under 21, would accompany me there, and I would hold her very close and very tight so that no one would think I was one of them. Though my homophobia was still very much present, it had shrunk. I became increasingly comfortable hanging out with gay friends. And I want to thank Richard for the original invitation and for being my friend and my teacher. Years later, my then girlfriend Helen and I would regularly go to visit Bryce and John, dear friends of hers who lived in Seattle, and we'd go for the weekend. They were a fun couple, and I enjoyed very much spending time with them. One Sunday morning, we'd gone out for brunch, and John and Helen had an errand to run. So Bryce and I were left at the table together, finishing our coffee. Excuse me. Anyway, as we were sipping coffee, use the prop, right?
Theater thing.
I asked Bryce, "How's it going with you, really?" And he looked at me and said, "Not well." I looked back and waited for more information, and he said to me, "Have you ever been at that place in a relationship where you reach out for your beloved and they move away? And it happens night after night after night?" I looked at Bryce and I answered, "I know what that feels like, because that's the place we've arrived at in my relationship." Oh my God. What Bryce felt was exactly what I felt. Oh my God, and duh. Love is love. I had already known that intellectually, but that morning I fully understood. Love is love. Heartache is heartache. It does not matter the gender of the one you love. Love is love. Thank you, Bryce, for being my friend and my teacher. Love is love. Yet for those who love the same gender or both genders, have for far too long not been treated the same and they're still not treated the same in far too many places. When I first arrived just over a decade ago to serve the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Whidbey Island, we as a congregation were actively involved in supporting a ballot initiative then being held in Washington state to make marriage, same-sex marriage, legal in that state. This was before the Supreme Court ruling. That November, we celebrated at the passage of Measure 94. Finally, folks, we're acknowledging that love is love. It passed by 52%. 52%, that means 48% had voted against it. Homophobia was still very much alive and well in the hearts and minds of many. Actually, let's strike that well. It was still alive in their hearts. And that continues to this day. While in Whidbey, I served on the board of the local chapter of PFLAG, which was the main LGBTQ+ advocacy organization on the island. And we did some educational programming. We sponsored one weekend a session called Trans 101. There I learned how nearly 5% of the population is considered to be part of those who fit under the inclusive umbrella of trans. That includes non-binary folks, those who live as a gender other than the one assigned at birth, and those who may have begun to transition medically. 5%, by the way, is about the same percentage of people as those who have red hair. I found that a helpful context. I learned that day a lot about the biology and the psychology and the reality of the lived lives of those who identity does not fit with society's, and my own too prevalent, own out of date and narrow definition. I had more work to do to deconstruct my own egocentric notions of what is normal. I learned that to be cisgendered, that is to have one's biological sex match one's psychological sex, was only one of a wide range of ways one can be in the world. Thank you to those who offered that program for being my teachers. My understanding continued to grow thanks to spending time in a number of settings with young people who were willing to be open about explorations and honest expressions of their own reality. And I was in communities where they felt safe to do so. One of those is my UU congregation and the congregations I serve. And one of those places is the UU summer camp that I've been attending every summer for nearly 30 years in Seabeck, Washington. It was there in particular that I got to know young people who identified as trans or non-binary. I remember one young person, I'll call them Robin, who as they grew up came to understand deeply that their assigned birth sex did not match who they knew. At the core of their being, they truly were. Fortunately, they lived in a supportive and open family and were surrounded by a community that supported their decision to transition and live their life as male. As a teenager, they began hormone therapy. They began regular injections of testosterone, or as Robin called it, T. We were Facebook friends, and I remember well a series of posts she made. The first, he simply looked at the camera and he said, "This is my voice after my first injection of T." A few weeks later, he posted again and he said, "This is my voice after multiple injections of T." Later, he posted a third video. "This is my voice. This is my voice." And he erupted into laughter. Finally, he could hear himself speak with a voice that he knew was truly his own. This was another oh my God moment, and a friggin' growth opportunity for this heterosexual, cisgendered old white guy. Thank you, Robin, for being my friend and my teacher, and for showing me and all who know you the truth of that line from one of our songs. You can be anybody you want to be, and that you need not lose yourself. I've been honored to officiate at same-sex weddings that are now the law of the land. I was also honored to officiate at the wedding of a couple who identified as non-binary. They had found that their identities do not fit either end of a binary male-female continuum. They too have been my teachers. Unfortunately, in these times, in spite of much progress and expanding understanding and acceptance of sexual diversity in both orientation and identity, we are, in the larger culture, facing incredible pushback. Rather than celebrating a rainbow of possibilities as to whom one might love or who one truly is, there are those who would impose their own narrow norms on all. Norms that are little changed from those taught to me when I was an adolescent. It seems they not only would like to reconstruct old notions and patriarchal, heterocentric, and homophobic limits and oppressions, but they would like to codify such limitations into law. I am called by my faith to say no. Called by a faith that affirms the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Called by a faith that affirms justice and equity and compassion for all. A faith that affirms justice and equity. A faith that affirms the rights of conscience of all. A faith that calls for acceptance of all and respect for all. A faith that has as its central tenet love. An inclusive love, a love that has existed since before the beginning and will never let us go. I am called to do what I can. Sometimes it's small things. If you get an email from me, you might note that part of my email signature, I use he, him pronouns, recognizing that others use different pronouns. In several advocacy groups I'm part of, and in my home church in Eugene, we regularly introduce ourselves using both our names and our pronouns. Doing so reminds me, and I hope help remind others, that we not all use binary gender labels. On Whitby, I was proud to join with my congregation to carry a Standing on the Side of Love banner at the annual Pride Parade, with all of us decked out in our yellow Unitarian Universalist t-shirts. And we're gonna do it in July in Roseburg, and some folks from Eugene are planning to come down and join us. In many cities, I seek to decenter myself, which is a hard one, but important work. I decenter myself and talk a bit less, because far too often cisgender white males have been at the center of much of our culture. I support with my presence and my donations LGBT plus advocacy efforts. I support political candidates who advocate for inclusion. And one I started just last summer, it's a suggestion I got from the Southern writer in the New York Times, Margaret Wrinkle. Every year for the 4th of July, I fly an American flag with a pride flag next to it. And most of all, I seek to keep my mind and my heart open to accept with love any feedback others might offer me that help me to speak and act in a manner that helps all to feel included. I'd like to close with the lyrics of a song. It's part of a fictional story, a story about characters with diverse sexual orientations and identities. It's the musical Rent. The story takes place, if you don't know it, over 1 year's time. 12 months, 52 weeks. For those who do not know, it's set in New York City in the midst of the AIDS pandemic, and it includes multiple love stories and one heartbreaking death. Over a year, 12 months, 52 weeks, or 525,600 minutes. 525,000 moments so dear. 525,600 minutes. How do you measure? Measure a year. How do you measure a year in the life of a woman, a man, in any life? How about love? How about love? How about love? Measure in love. Seasons of love. Seasons of love. May it always be so. As you ponder what's moving for you, I want to invite you into a movement meditation. It's a meditation that came to me sometimes past, and I may have shared it here before. I can't remember when and where I've done it. I go on the road to a variety of congregations. Begin with your hands open in front of you. Open to receive whatever may come to you. And as you breathe in, take it to your heart and hold it there for a moment. And then as you exhale, let it go. So that your hands may be open again to receive what comes. So we'll do it again slowly with some words, and then quietly a few times together. And it's a pause between the inhale and the exhale with hands open and heartfelt pause. Okay? Hands open. In, hold, and let go. In, and out. In, and out. Let's just hold it there in silence for a brief time. Then just take one big cleansing breath. Big breath in, big breath out. Come on, open up. May we stay fully present to what moves within and amongst us. And Sally now is going to solicit the offering for this beloved community.